Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 2, Part A, which for us is going to be sections 2.1 on All Hail the Self, 2.2 All Hail My Group, and 2.3 Toughest Mental Obstacles. And then after that, I'll have another video for 2B, which is sections 2.4 about your brain on social media and 2.5 Philosophical Obstacles. And so we're going to work through those. I left our big words up on the board because they are, the same. We keep them as we go through the course. I won't always have everything up here, but for here in the beginning, it's not so bad. We had these for Chapter 1. Worldview is technically a Chapter 2, hence its little red star. And then evidence is the other one from Chapter 2. You can tell by page numbers. Okay. So critical thinking, the systematic evaluation or formulation of beliefs or statements by rational standards. Logic, the study of good reasoning or inference and the rules that govern it. Worldview, a philosophy of life, a set of fundamental ideas that helps us make sense of a wide range of important issues in life. Statement, which is also a claim or a belief, an assertion that something is or is not the case. Argument, big deal. Critical thinking and argument. Okay. A group of statements in which some of them, the premises, are intended to support another of them, the conclusion. Okay. And then our new one for Chapter 2 is evidence, something that makes a statement more likely to be true. More likely to be true. Okay, so that kind of gives you the overview of that particular mess. They will all be on the first test, as will a few extras from Chapter 3, but we'll get there eventually. Okay, so in the intro to this chapter, Dr. Vaughn reminds us that critical thinking is the systematic evaluation or formulation of beliefs or statements by rational standards. Because we are fallible, there are 1,000 ways that this failure of reason could come about, and there is no cure for fallibility. We all make mistakes. Hopefully, most of those mistakes are by accident, and we do our best to remedy them. Okay. There are ways to, 1, detect errors in our thinking, even subtle ones. 2, restrain the attitudes and feelings that can distort our reasoning. And 3, achieve a level of objectivity that makes critical thinking possible. Okay, we can do this. It does take some work. Okay, and he goes on and tells us doing this requires awareness, practice, and motivation. Awareness not only for good critical thinking, but also for what sloppy thinking entails. Okay, knowing how to recognize good thinking when you see it, and how to recognize and correct bad or sloppy thinking when you see it. We have to practice this. We're not naturally good at it. Practice avoiding the pitfalls and using good skills in our critical thinking. And then motivation, or we won't do it at all. Okay, we have to be motivated by something. One is we have to be motivated by the fact that our thinking matters, because our thinking drives our actions, and our actions need to have a good basis in reality. Okay. So 2.1, all hail the self. As humans, we spend a great deal of time protecting, maintaining, and comforting our own mental life. It's all good, unless we put ourselves above all other considerations. When we're little and we're selfish, sometimes it can just be kind of cute. Sometimes it's just a little annoying. Okay. As we grow up and get responsible for more things and more ideas and our own day-to-day life stuff, our decisions are important. And at the very least, we're going to be inconvenienced. At the worst side of that is that we're going to make problems for other people. We're going to cause unnecessary stress and anxiety that way. It's also all good until we accept or defend claims just to cover up the cracks in our image. Egocentrism, which is focus on myself alone to all others' detriment or potential detriment, limits our careful evaluation of claims, It limits critical inquiry. It blinds us to the facts. It provokes self-deception. It engenders rationalizations, and it can lead you to suppress or ignore good evidence. It also begets wishful thinking. And what Dr. Vaughn means by wishful thinking is not in a good way, okay? When we're guilty of wishful thinking, we put too many, for example, we put too much work on our subordinates and they get burnt out, upset, too much anxiety, and not good for them, right? And then it ends up not being good for us as managers because they don't get their work done. It looks bad for me. Okay, so we have to have that balance of, okay, this is reasonable, and that's what we need to promote. If it's not reasonable, we need to take a step back and think, okay, would I want to do this? Would I be able to do this with the capacity that I want them to do it or not? Okay, it's the teacher who really wants you to do all the stuff in the book because the book is so cool and the exercises are interesting and it's going to help you out. And that's wonderful, but it's wishful thinking because nobody has that much time in their life. Okay, and so our motivation has to be what is going to be reasonable, what is going to be the most crucial, and what is going to be the best outcome. Francis Bacon, not related to Kevin, well, at least I don't think so. Anyway, Francis Bacon was an Enlightenment thinker who really looked at what people were doing with critical thinking. And he found out that most people make a host of mistakes in their critical thinking. And this is because they have what he thought of as idols of the mind. Things in our thinking that we set up almost as little minor gods, okay? And of course, an idol is a false god, so they don't help us. End of that. So there's a further thinking box on page 32 that says he had 4 ideas. He classified all the mistakes that people make in critical thinking into 4 categories, okay? Idols of the tribe. These are the problems in thinking that arise from human nature generally, okay? Everybody does this. That our biased perceptions are automatically true and represent the objective world. That's what we think. We're wrong, but that's what we think, okay? Idols of the cave are biases that are unique to each person or individual. Bacon claimed that we each live in our own little cave, which refracts and discolors the light of nature. Now, if you have any background in Greek philosophy, Socrates, Plato, his teacher, wrote, well, he didn't write, Socrates wrote, right? No. Anyway, Plato wrote about the cave, okay? And the cave is basically, we think we're out in the real world, experiencing the world around us. What's really going on is that we're sitting in a cave and the real world that we're looking at is really just a bunch of shadows. All the things in the real world are going on outside the cave, behind us. We don't see them, but we see their shadows. And that's what we think reality is. Okay, so that's kind of what Bacon is playing off of. Idols of the marketplace develop from our imprecise and careless use of language. The ill and unfit choice of words wonderfully obstructs the understanding of people. So we think we know what these words mean, but they don't. Princess Bride, people out there, inconceivable. I do not think that word means what you think it means. That's an idol of the marketplace. The last one is idols of the theater, the ideologies and systems of thought that are but so many stage plays, representing worlds of their own creation after an, sorry, I can't read my own writing here, unreal and scenic fashion. Sorry, I'm like, what is that? Anyway, these barriers to good critical thinking have little or nothing to do with the real world, but are nevertheless thought to be accurate and profound. folks that live in their own world of delusion, whether that's by choice or by pathology. Okay, that's kind of where that comes from. Another, for further thought, is on page 33, and its little title is it wrong to believe without good reasons? Now, lots of philosophers have tackled this question in various ways, but W.K. Clifford has a very, this is the problem, okay? So he says, it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And Clifford thinks that belief without evidence is immoral because our actions are guided by our beliefs. And if our beliefs are unfounded, our actions, including morally relevant ones, are likely to be imprudent, not a good idea. And so his way of thinking made it sinful for people to believe anything without sufficient evidence. Now, I don't know if Clifford was a person of faith or not. Lots of folks will say, well, faith. I have faith in God. I can't necessarily give you a good reason for that. Well, you can. If you really believe in God, in a deity, then you should have some evidence from your own life, from other followers' lives, that belief in God is a good thing, promotes good outcomes, at the very least, okay? God is faithful. So who am I? Okay? There's a lot to unpack in that. How can we overcome the excessive influence of our own needs? Okay, in the all hail the self. Okay, we all want to be comfortable and happy and productive, mostly, and we are all about figuring out ways to make that happen, right? But it can get in the way of critical thinking, and we need to watch out for some things that when they happen, we go, oh, I'm taking care of myself to the detriment of others. It's not a good thing. So the 3 guidelines, and it's on page 34. Watch out when things get very personal. If you have that surge of emotion when somebody brings up a topic, take a breath, take a step, okay? Be alert to ways that critical thinking can be undermined. Things like if I'm taking myself too seriously, if I'm looking at things from the wrong perspective, if I know where things are supposed to go and they don't go there, I'm in trouble. And ensure that nothing has been left out. Okay? Most of the time with self-interested thinking, we are trying to either make up for a mistake, hide a mistake so that we don't get caught, per se, or we're cherry picking information and it leads to bad decisions. Okay, we're going to talk about more of that later on in this chapter. Okay, our emotions are essential to our thinking. A problem comes not when we appeal to emotions in our argument, but when we appeal to nothing but emotions. Guilt, anger, fear, pity, passion, compassion, rather than presenting relevant reasons. Some of those reasons are emotional, okay? Why should you adopt a pet from a shelter as opposed to going out and buying a purebred? Okay? There's emotional stuff behind that. And we know this because if you have any kind of news feed at all, or on television at all, or radio. Do we do radio anymore? I don't do radio anymore. I do stuff like Pandora, Spotify. Anyway, if we're getting an ad that is all the sad puppies, okay, it's horrible what goes on out in the world, what people do to other people, what people do what people do to animals, that kind of stuff. It's all horrible, but you can make a difference, and that's the whole point of the ad, right? And so it's not a bad thing that they're pulling on our heartstrings, but if that's all they're doing, then it's probably not a real credible charity. Most of them will tell you, oh, we've done this, this, and this. We have, bought with your money. We've bought, food for shelters. We've done cleaning. We've done bedding. We've done, shots and surgeries and da da da. Okay, so they've got a plan. That's the good reasons. The emotions are important. So are the reasons. Okay. In 2.2, he starts out that section with a little example of the Borg. Now, I love Star Trek. Okay, I'm Trekkie from way back, and the Borg are scary. Their ship is a square, which is totally different from everybody else's. Resistance is futile, kind of thing. And the whole thing that makes it so weird for us as human beings is that this collective is a collective of people and brains and ideas and all that, but it's singular. It's much like our bodies ourselves, right? So we have how many parts, all various things, doing different things, all essential to us being upright and mobile, right? The Borg is like that. They are all essential, but there's no individuality. And we, reject that. So individualism, the Borg is our paradox, okay? Individualism, independence, and freedom of thought are what we want, what we must have. But we also want to belong. We want the safety and comfort of numbers. We want the approval of our beloved tribe. It's all good until our conformism hampers or obliterates critical thinking. Okay. A few things to think about as far as definitions and stuff goes. Groupthink. Okay. Guy Harrison says, the common and dangerous tendency to fall in line and agree, even when we should know better. Most people go along to get along. This happens a lot. And in some ways, it's a good thing because you don't have to make waves for everything. You don't have to make a fuss. But there are some things that we need to make a fuss about, and it's sometimes easier just to say, yeah, that's fine, move on. Not a good look, though. Peer pressure, influenced by those of our same rank or group. Okay, and we talk about this a lot for, say, junior high and high school, middle school and high school. Being careful not to fall into peer pressure too often. Peer pressure can have positive aspects, but a lot of times we see it as a negative because we would not, of ourselves, choose to do certain things. But if we're in a room full of people or our friends are saying, oh, we're going to do this and this and this, it's hard to go against that, but we need to try harder. Another group issue is appeal to popularity, also known as appeal to the masses. When the influence comes from the popularity of an idea, everybody's doing it. It's not a big deal, okay? That's fallacy. Appeal to common practice, pressure or influence coming from what groups of people do or how they behave. We also call this tradition. Again, tradition is not necessarily bad, but if that's your only reason for doing something is because that's just the way we've always done it, better look at that, okay? That's how we get systemic prejudice, racism, those kinds of things are because that's just the way we do it. Well, that's not a good reason. Find a better one. So presuming our group is the best, the right one, the chosen one, This assumption is at the center of prejudice, which is a negative or adverse belief about others without sufficient reasons. It is dislike or intolerance based on no good evidence. Okay? Prejudice. Like the influence of the self, this endemic pressure can lead to wishful thinking, rationalization, self-deception, and worst of all, violence, as we've seen even just this past week. Stereotyping is a type of prejudice, classifying individuals into groups according to oversimplified or prejudiced attitudes or opinions. And there's a review notes box on page 38 for all of that. For critical thinkers, the only way to counter the outsized influence of the group is to achieve an impartial stance and proportion your belief to the strength of the reasons. Both actions take courage, dedication, and practice. Okay? The first time we say no to a group of friends or a family, I'm not going to do that because I don't feel that it's right or fair or whatever the adjective is you need to use for that. It gets easier. It gets easier as you do it more often, hence the practice. It gets easier to figure out, okay, is this something I need to stand on, or is this something I can say, you know, I'm good, not for me today, and just move on. Okay, we don't always have to get on our soapbox and scream at people. It can be fun, but you know. Okay. This last section in what I'm calling 2A is 2.3, the toughest mental obstacles. These obstacles are hindrances that affect humans in every endeavor, from personal judgments to high-stakes decision-making in business, government, politics, social networks, even scientific research. And this is where we get our term, where we use our term evidence. Something that makes a statement more likely to be true. Okay? That's what evidence is. Now, we use evidence in lots and lots of areas, right? What counts as evidence in criminal justice is different from what counts as evidence in, literary thinking, okay? Same idea, different stuff. Just because we like a statement doesn't mean it's true. It's very sad. Okay, one of the things is denying contrary evidence. Denying evidence, we all do it, may be psychologically comforting for a while anyway, but it thwarts any search for knowledge and stunts our understanding. We often don't reject the evidence outright. Sometimes we put more scrutiny on counter evidence than we do on our side of things. That's not fair. We find ways to interpret it so it's not as important. There's a study that they list in this section about two groups of people. One group is for the death penalty, the other group was against the death penalty, and they're given the same stack of evidence to read. Some of it is pro capital punishment, some of it is against capital punishment. Almost to a person, the folks who, so they both got the same sets of evidence. One is for, one is against. The people who were already against capital punishment believe that the article on against capital punishment is well written. It's a great source. It's got, really good evidence and everything. And the one that's against capital punishment is just not written as well, not done as well, not as good. And both sides did that. Okay, so whichever article they agreed with was wonderful and amazing, and the other one was, it's okay. It's not really, anything to speak of. And it's interesting to me. The only available remedy is to make a conscious effort to look for opposing evidence. This is why when you're doing a research paper, English 112 class especially, you have to have at least two sources that don't agree with your proposal. You have to. You have to look at the other side. Even if you think there's nothing on the other side, nobody would disagree with this, well, then it's not really an argument, is it? So if it's an argument, somebody would disagree. So how did they work? Okay. A basic principle of scientific work is not to accept a favored theory until competing or alternative theories are thoroughly examined. Okay. The next mess is looking for confirming evidence. We call this confirmation bias, right? When we seek out and use only the evidence that agrees with us. I read 20 articles and they all said da da da. Well, yeah, but there's 50 articles that tell you they're wrong and this is not how it works. Okay. Cherry picking evidence can cause us to believe in something that's not true. Tom Nichols wrote a book called The Death of Expertise. And he says confirmation bias makes attempts at reasoned arguments exhausting because it produces arguments and theories that are non-falsifiable. It is the nature of confirmation bias itself to dismiss all contradictory evidence as irrelevant. And so my evidence is always the rule, and your evidence is always a mistake or an exception. Acquiring a broader, smarter, more critical perspective takes effort and guts. Okay, this is one of the most disturbing ideas in this chapter, and it's a further thought box called implicit bias. Okay. It is a particularly insidious hindrance to critical thinking when we form beliefs or attitudes about racial or ethnic groups other than our own. Implicit bias is a negative attitude toward a group of people that operates unintentionally or unconsciously. And we call these things perceptual illusions. So just because you're looking at, and this is the big deal, just because you're looking at the face of a black man doesn't mean that he's menacing or mean or going to hurt you. I mean, we say it out loud and we're like, well, of course, that doesn't have anything to do with it. That's not how that works. But our implicit bias is because we've grown up in this culture where people of color have less or are thought of as less than white people. It's why racism in this country is so systemic and just down into the dust of all of it, and why it's been so hard to get rid of. The good news is even a lifelong implicit bias against a certain ethnic group, it can be unlearned, relearned to something more positive. And it doesn't take a lot of time. You have to be conscious of it, and you have to be aware that we all do it, okay? There's nobody in class that you walk by in the hallways that you see on the television. There's nobody on the planet that doesn't do this in some way, okay, with some group of people. But once you know that, oh, this is a thing, I don't do that, keep an eye out. You'll see it, okay? The good news, you can alter your responses. Dana Bowen Matthew has done extensive research on this, so have a lot of other people. Implicit attitudes are neither inaccessible or inescapable. They're not impossible to control. They are not out of reach. We can overcome these through conscious and deliberate choices. Okay, so we have to know, and now you know, and make an effort to not go down that road. Okay, short-term change can overcome a lifetime of social knowledge. Okay, it's a hard thing and it's a horrible thing, and it's deeper than most of us understand, but we can do better. So we should try to do better. Okay, so that's kind of the long and short of that one. There is a review notes box on page 42. Motivated reasoning Basically, it's when we want a particular outcome from a situation or an argument or an investigation, and we're less likely to look at real evidence. Okay? When we want to protect or promote our cherished political or personal beliefs, reasoning for the purpose of supporting a predetermined conclusion, not to uncover the truth. It happens, even in things like criminal justice and any kind of inquiry. Defeating motivated reasoning is hard. So that you don't do it yourself, be reasonably skeptical of all sources, but especially of those that support your beliefs. Okay? Be wary of your own assessments of the credibility of sources that contradict your beliefs. Give opposing views a chance. Break out of the filter bubble. Now, the filter bubble is very much a problem these days, especially because you can go on social media and find 10,000 friends that think the same way you do, talk about the same things that you talk about in the same way you talk about them, and it's kind of like being in an echo chamber. You never hear anything other than what you already know, what you already believe. And so we have to step out of our comfort zones, look at alternative news sources, look at different perspectives, make an effort to read, people from other countries and other languages and all kinds of things. So, and the last piece of this is preferring available evidence. This is an availability error. Now, I'm just going to work through it. When we rely on evidence, not because it's trustworthy, but because it's memorable or striking, that is psychologically available. And the one that always gets me is is it safer for traveling to fly or to drive? A lot of folks would say, oh, it's much safer to drive. Did you see the wreckage from that South Korean plane that went down? Oh my goodness, 179 people died. Yes, it's true. It's also very striking and memorable. We have the vision, we have these pictures in our heads. But statistically, it is much safer to drive, mileage-wise, than it is to fly. Other way around. It's much safer to fly than it is to drive. Number of accidents, number of people who die, all of that stuff is much higher for vehicle accidents than it is for airplane accidents. The last piece on page 44 is hasty generalization. And we're going to see this concept lots of times throughout the book. But basically, hasty generalization is when we draw a conclusion about a whole group based on an inadequate sample of the group. Okay? So we know two people who are, from Pango Pango, and they're both horrible people. So we make the assumption that all the folks from Pango Pango are bad. Okay? Not true. Okay? Not how it works. But that's a hasty generalization. It's lazy thinking. Many of us are, guilty of that. So, chapter 2A, All Hail the Self, My Mighty Group, Mental Obstacles, that's the first section, and we're going to go on from there in this next little video of 2B. So, anyway, if you have questions, let me know. You know how to get a hold of me. You have my email.